This is Kyle Stallings. We're here at the Tomball Museum Center. It's November 28, 2023. We're here today to interview Hank Weirich to get his memories of growing up in Tomball. This is part of our ongoing video series, taking interviews of some of the families who made this area of Northwest Harris County such a great place. This is part of our ongoing series, and you can see our other videos on our YouTube channel at Tomball Museum. Will you give us your full name, Hank?
My given name is Henry Fred Weirich. I go by Hank because my father's name was also Henry, and my mother was afraid there would be too much confusion, so I was called Hank, and I've always gone by that. And yeah, that's Hank Weirich.
And tell us about your wife and any kids you have.
I have a wife. Her name is Isabel. She is very instrumental in me having as much knowledge and things on the Weirich family. She loves to do genealogy. She's ever since we started dating 30 years ago. She found out things about the Weirich family that I never knew existed. So Isabel is a big part of this.
And tell us about your brothers or sisters.
I have a half brother. His name is Michael Allen Jones. He grew up here in Tomball, and I've got some stories about him later on when we talk about Tomball. But I have a sister named Emily Irene, and she lives in Bliblerville, which is near Industry, Texas. Her daughter and son-in-law and their family live up there, and she moved up there to be close to them. And I had a younger sister named Abigail who passed away when she was 12. She had a brain tumor, and she passed away at a very young age. So that's all the brothers and sisters that I have.
And tell us the name of your parents.
My father's name was Henry Herman Weirich, and my mother was Tessie Winkle Weirich, and they lived right down the street from here in earlier years, and and my grandfather on the Weirich side was Fred C.E. Weirich, Fred Carl Edward Weirich, and he was born in Rose Hill in 1889.
Where was the house that y'all lived in here in Tomball?
Okay, we lived at the corner of Pine and Mason, which is 2 blocks from here, 501 Mason. We also lived at 506 Mason, which is where my mom, before she married my dad, owned that house and lived there. Later, my grandfather bought it from her, but I grew up on Mason Street. I used to drive by here before any of these buildings were here. Ride by on my bicycle. So I traveled this area a lot.
And what was your mother's full name, maiden name?
Her name was Tessie Violet Winkle Weirich, and they moved to Tomball in around 32 or 33. My grandfather, I.W. Winkle, was in the oil and gas business, and the company he worked for at that time, Armorata Hess, sent him here, and he stayed here until he passed away in 1958.
And where was the Winkle family from before that?
The Winkle family is from East Texas. East Texas and southern Arkansas and Louisiana, northern Louisiana in the Cotton Valley area. But Winsboro is in East Texas, and my mother was actually born in Scroggins, Texas, which is a railroad crossing, is basically what it was when she was born there. And her father was also born there, but they lived in that Winsboro, Scroggins area, and then moved back and forth between DeQueen, Arkansas, and Winsboro.
I mean, it looked like your mother went to schools here in Tomball too, right?
Yes, she went here in 1937, 1938. She was in school here, and I actually have a couple of her old yearbooks that are not very good shape now, but yes, she is in that picture that you're looking for.
This was a drill team.
This was a drill team photo, and she is the one on the end on the back row.
Looked like the first drill team in Tomball.
Yep.
From 1936 to 1937.
Yeah, 36 and 37, and she graduated in 38.
Great. And did your dad go to Tomball schools as well?
My dad grew up on, he was born in Houston in the Heights, and they moved back to Tomball in 23, and he went to Willow Creek School. And the Willow Creek School turned into Rural High number 1, and then Rural High number 1 turned into Klein School District. And he only went through the 8th grade, and after that he went to work on the farm with my grandfather, helped doing the farm, and they were truck farmers. And Willow Creek is east of Tomball at Willow Creek, and not too far from Tomball, but it's a little east of Tomball.
It's out toward Hooks Airport.
It's toward Hooks Airport, yes.
Do you know roughly where their place was, where they did the truck farming?
Yes, it was on Huffsmith-Corville Road, between Mahaffey Road and 2920.
Y'all lived out there later, didn't you?
Yes, we got, my grandfather gave us a piece of land, and my mom and dad built a house out there, and we lived out there. We probably moved out there in 65, maybe, something like that. But yeah, their farm was there, and they used to walk. It was about a mile and a half walk to the school from the house. And my grandfather used to tell me stories about the kids walking to school there. After my dad and my uncle Collie, who was the second oldest, after he got out of school, then the rest of the kids all went to Tomball school. There was three other children, and they all graduated from Tomball High School.
And you mentioned Collie. Is that Charles?
Charles Edward, yes.
Why did they call him Collie?
I have no idea. That was just a nickname for Charles.
Was he older? Or
he was younger. He was, let me get this right, 13 months younger than my dad. He was also born in the Heights. That's where my grandfather met my grandmother. He was living there with his half-brother and Willie Weirich, and he met my grandmother there in the Heights, and they got married and had my dad Henry and my uncle Collie, and then they moved, when they were young children, they moved back to Tomball. They bought that land on Huffsmith-Corville. They had it started out with about 25 acres, but by the early 1930s, they had 66 acres out there that they farmed.
Was that near the Siebers land?
Actually, no. It's on the other side of 29. The Siebers live on the other side of 2920. We were right next to the Lewis Dairy, which is south of 2920 on Huffsmith-Corville. The Siebers live north.
Yeah.
Okay. I have my uncle John, my grandfather Fred, his brother John lived right next door to the Sieber there, where the Sieber's property is.
And they also did truck farming.
They were truck farmers also. In fact, they used to, my Uncle John and my grandfather used to take the, at first it started out by wagon. They would take them by wagon, which was a 2-day trip. And they would stop at Epps Island, which is basically 249 in West Montgomery, that area. They would stop there at night and then go on into the farmers market downtown and sell their fruit and fruits and vegetables, and then come back. Later on, they started using a Model T Ford and did all that with by vehicle.
So we're talking about your grandfather, Fred, Carl, Edward.
Correct.
Weirich,
Fred.
And your dad, Henry, and then his brother, Charles. Did they have any other kids in that family?
Yes, I had there was another son. Well, there's 2 other sons. The next oldest one was Ernest Weirich. And after that came Ruby. She married Melvin Rowland, who was from Tomball also. And then there was, the baby was Lawrence, who we call Lonnie, my Uncle Lonnie. And
did any of them live around Tomball?
My aunt Ruby lived in Jersey Village. My Uncle Ernie moved to Beaumont. He was in the oil and gas business. He did some kind of not sales. He was took care of all the books. Basically, a bookkeeper, and he bought the equipment and kept the surplus and everything. But he lived in Beaumont. And then for a while he lived in Louisiana. My Aunt Ruby lived in Jersey Village. My Uncle Lonnie lived in Cypress for a while. He was a painter. He also was went to college to be a musician, I guess. He ended up being a choir director at a church off of Jones Road and Grant Road. It was called, I think it was Candlestick Baptist Church back then. Now it's Metropolitan Baptist Church. It's a very big church over there. But he did that for a while as a musician, but didn't pay a lot of money, so he was a painter on the side. A number of years ago, he had a accident and cut off some of his fingers. While he was in the hospital, he ended up having a stroke, and it affected him a lot. But he's getting close to 90 now. My Aunt Ruby is still alive, and my Uncle Lonnie is still alive. Those are the last 2 of that generation.
So tell us about Collie, your Uncle Collie, or Charles.
He was a carpenter by trade, and from what I remember and what I have been told, a very good carpenter, and built a lot of homes and did a lot of construction work. And but later, and he also, I'll tell you a little story about his wartime duties. He was a lineman for General Patton. In other words, he was would run all the telegraph wires prior to them setting up a headquarters somewhere. And I actually have a picture of him on a pole in World War II. And he and another guy were up stringing wire, and he got shot off the pole. Didn't get hit, but he fell and broke both of his legs and was in the hospital. And General Patton came through and, talked to him and whatever. He didn't talk about it a lot, but we got the story from him. And but after that, he had a dairy farm right there on Huffsmith, Corville, and Mahaffey. He, my uncle, my grandfather, and my uncle Lonnie ran the dairy. They were all partners in the dairy there.
And that was the land near the Lewis Dairy?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
right next. Yes, right next door to it. And we ended up, our house ended up being at the corner of where the Lewis's dairy was, and then my grandfather's property where he had the dairy. And so in the 40s they got out of the farming business because my grandfather was getting older, so they got into the dairy business, and they ran that dairy from in the late 40s, and I tried to find out the exact dates, but my Aunt Ruby kind of remembered but didn't really remember. So from the late 40s, 46, 47, something like that, they had the dairy up until 68. And in 68, my Uncle Collie got out of the dairy business, got rid of all his equipment, and bought the store in Huffsmith, and ran that store for a number of years. And there was a post office attached to it, the Huffsmith post office. His wife Mary ran the post office, and he ran the store.
And did they live somewhere near there?
They lived, yes. I mean, so Stanlin Road runs from Huffsmith Road and goes and crosses the railroad tracks. Where you cross the railroad tracks, if you turn left, there was a dirt road. You followed the dirt road around back, and they had 50 acres back in the woods there.
Was it before the railroad tracks, south of the
Yes.
tracks? Okay.
And then you cross the railroad tracks, and then there's the store, was the store and the post office, which is now the home of Mel's Country Cafe, which my cousin and her brother run. And my Uncle Collie used to go to the farmer's market on Airline Drive and pick up all the fresh fruits and vegetables for the restaurant when he was alive.
And who are those cousins' names?
Charles Weirich and Melody Weirich. Melody doesn't work too much, but she's still involved. Her husband Jeff Henry, he is the chef that plans all the food and everything, and they've been married since the mid 80s. So
let's go back to your grandfather, Fred Carl Edward. What did y'all call him? Did you remember hearing a name for him?
Most people called him either Fred or Fritz.
Okay.
And how it was Fred Carl Edward, I have no idea, although I do have a copy of his birth certificate, and that was the name that he was given, Fred Carl Edward. And
it looked like, from looking up ancestry information, he was born at Rose Hill in 1889, right?
Yeah, so it's funny how over the years families don't talk and don't communicate their history and things like that. I knew my grandfather, never really knew where he was from. My dad never went into that. I was probably in maybe 7th grade, 8th grade. So my dad was, very active in the volunteer fire department. So one day, went to school, and everybody was talking about the Milners who lived at the corner of Telge and 2920, about their barn burning down. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. Big fire. It was a big fire. So I came home that afternoon, and as I'm walking through the house, my dad's walking by, and I said, hey, did you hear about the Milner's barn burning down? And without ever breaking stride, he goes, yeah, that's where your grandfather was born. And I'm like, it shocked me. I was like, what? So I had to stop him, make him stop. And so evidently the barn was at one time was the house, and that's where my great-great-grandfather Herman was living when my grandfather was born.
And tell us which corner that is. At Telge
That's going to be on the southeast corner
of Telge
and 2920.
Okay.
Yeah, the Milner's house set back off the road a ways. In fact, I think that house is still there. But the barn, you know, and I never knew this, just, you know, and then so later on in years I started asking my dad more questions about, you know, I mean, and you know, I never knew my great-grandfather was buried at Salem Lutheran. You know, I used to go there with, you know, people's funerals that, you know, and as later on in years I find out, you know, that we're related to a lot more people. You know, my dad was a joker, and he'd say things and you'd think, is he really telling the truth, or is that just he's just messing with us? But yeah, come to find out, we've been here a long time, and we've, you know, related to quite a few people.
Fred Carl Edwards, your grandfather's, his dad, what was his name?
Herman Weirich.
And he was the one that was married to Catherine Bodie?
He was married to originally he was married to Caroline Fritchie. The Fritchies are from down more towards the Cypress area. If you go down Telge to Grant and you go west, the first road you come to is Fritchie Cemetery, and if you go back in the woods, it's now controlled by Precinct 4 or 3, whichever one it is now, but it's fenced, and you have to. It's kind of hard to get to. But his first wife was Caroline. She died of she fell on a knife going to the garden to cut lettuce, is the story we always heard. They had one son, Wilhelm Herman, and we always called him Uncle Willie. And then he married Catherine Bodie, and they had 4 children. 3 of them lived. Annie Weirich, she married a Hirsch. She was the oldest. Or is that that might not be right.
Well, the oldest looked like it was John M.
Uncle John was the oldest, and then Annie, and then my grandfather was the baby. Then they had one more child, I think it was Clara, and she died as an infant. So,
did Herman live there around Tuggy Road, the same place your grandfather lived?
Yeah, so the problem we have is his father, Christian Weirich, immigrated from Germany in 1854. In 1855, his wife, Wilhelmina, and his sister, Catherine, and the oldest daughter, Ida, they came from Germany. Now, we thought they all came together, and I could have swore that I had seen somewhere where they were all together, but recently we found that he came in 54 through New Orleans. They came together, but she came using her maiden name, which is Wilhelmina's maiden name was Jochim, Jochim, and Catherine Weirich, and then there's no record of Ida, who would at that time would have been less than a year old. And so they came from Germany, and they settled in that Rose Hill area. And so in 1870, they had my grandfather, and then they had 2 more daughters, Emily, Martha, then Richard, then Marie, and then Otto was the baby. In 1871, 2 weeks before Otto was born, Christian had there was a pandemic going around. I'm not sure if it was yellow fever or smallpox or what it was, but he passed away. Otto was born 2 weeks later. A month later, Wilhelmina died. So Wilhelmina, so that left Ida, who was 15, 16 years old, to take care of the baby. And we have we had some records that show that she had basically taken a sugar cane and cut it and put a rag around it in order to feed the baby. So later on, so all the kids were basically under 16. So Catherine, who came from Germany with them, married Daniel Werner, and they were married in the Salem Lutheran Church in the 1850s. In Tomball. Supposedly one of the first weddings in that church, and there's supposedly a portrait or a picture of them, but we've never been able to. We've never seen it. We were told that it existed by some other family members, but no one can seem to get a copy of it. But anyway, so they were married and were having kids at the same time that so they took all the rest of the kids and became their guardians, Daniel Werner and Catherine Weirich Werner, and that was in early 1870s. And so there was never anything passed down, like a lot of families have family Bibles and stuff like that. We have no idea what happened to all their stuff. And after that, the family kind of split up and splintered and went in different directions. And although we have made contact with some of the other relatives in the last few years, but they don't really have any knowledge of any of that. So it's kind of we're kind of in the dark on some things, but we put it together where we can.
It sounds like the Weirichs have been around this area a long time, though, right?
54 is when 55. So by 56, if you go back, and I'll tell anybody that's listening, the greatest book that we found is that Salem Lutheran Green Book. It has all the births, deaths, and confirmations and marriages, although the marriages didn't start recording them till the 1870s.
So while we're on the older generations, you were talking about your great-grandfather, Herman, and his first wife had passed away early, but the second wife, what was her name?
Catherine Bodie.
And have you heard or looked up much about the Bodies around Tomball?
Well, some, but not a lot. I mean, Johannes Bodie they were living here he was in the Civil War. He actually fought for the Confederacy. He had went off to war, and evidently he had been married to Catherine Benner Bodie. And when he was at war, he found out that a couple of his children had passed away and that everybody was sick. So he left the war. I don't know if he was ever considered a deserter or what, but he came back, to take care of his family. And there was several of them, and they owned the land right there at 2920. It would have been west of old 149, where Johnson Pontiac was.
The Four Corners?
Yeah, at Four Corners.
Which corner?
That would have been the southwest corner, yeah. Johnson Pontiac. So you go back a little ways, and then they owned that land that went up onto that hill where Coles and all that is. the original Krogers that came in over there bought that land or traded so Johannes Bodie had a son named John Bodie. They called him Doc Bodie. I have no idea why they call him Doc Bodie. I don't think he was a doctor, but they called him Doc Bodie. So he ended up, once that land was split up, he ended up with that portion of it. And then I think you found some records where your grandfather bought some land from my great-grandmother Catherine over there off of over there where near the tractor company was, which I didn't know that part of it. But they owned that, and that was where their farm was. And we've read in another book, and I wish I could remember where it was, that the Weirich family was neighbors with the Petricks, which the Petricks owned land north of Salem Lutheran Church that backed up to Spring Creek.
There's still a bunch of Petricks up there.
Yeah.
Right now. Yeah. So
somewhere in there is where the Christian Weirich family was. Now Herman, after they lived out in Rose Hill, there was a homestead. They had some land over off of Zion Road that ran back from, I'm not sure how close to Zion it came, but if you go to, there's a little subdivision there, McKinney Place. If you go to McKinney Place and you go through the woods back towards the creek, that was where their property was. And in fact, I have a picture of their house that was back there. And it's a funny picture, because if you look at it, there's two little girls in the picture. Well, the little one is not really a girl. That's the younger brother. He just had to wear the girls' hand-me-downs.
Does it have the names of the people on that?
It's Dora Hirsch and Fred Hirsch. My Aunt Annie was married to a Hirsch.
And that's the Catherine Bodie Weirich home?
Yes. That was her home. And it actually backed up to the Spring Creek. And I have the paperwork at home where they actually sold an easement to the railroad, for the railroad that came through and that goes through Huffsmith. She sold an easement to it. A few years later, they sold that house and moved to Houston. Uncle Willie was working at Hinkie and Pelot, which was downtown. So my grandfather went to work there in, I guess, about 1912. And he worked at Hinkie and Pelot until when they moved back out here into Tomball, he actually was driving back and forth to work downtown. And
is that where they lived, in the Heights?
Yes.
When he was working at Hinkie Pelot?
Right. They lived in the Heights off of Main and Walton, which, if anybody who's familiar with that area knows, that's right, not a few blocks from where the Shipley, original Shipley's Donuts is, right down there. But yeah, so.
And that the Pelots that were involved in that, it's a pretty big family, but part of them was the ones that had the Pelot house right here at our museum.
Right.
But originally it was over there at Willow Creek, right?
Okay, so it was, I don't know where it originally was, but I know back in the mid 60s it was on Boudreaux Road. Yeah. Because my Aunt Ruby's in-laws rented it for a time and were living there, and we used to go over there on Sundays and play. My Aunt Ruby has a daughter and a couple of sons that are same age as my sisters and I, and we would go over there on Sundays and play. And I remember playing in that house, going up those steep stairs up to that upstairs.
Roughly when was this?
Oh, it had to have been 64, 65, something like that. We were really young, but
Pretty cool.
pretty cool.
So this house you were showing me, the Catherine Bodie, Weirich, and Herman. Do you know if this house is still there?
No.
All right.
Okay, from what my dad told me is whoever bought the place moved the house and moved it to Houston. And I wish I wish I would have asked more questions and wrote more things down, because my dad would say things and it would kind of go over my head. But
So you had a few other photos.
I have another picture. This is a home of Doc Bodie.
All right. So this would have been over there near where Johnson Pontiac used to be.
Yeah, kind of where the bowling alley is now, back up on that hill.
Yeah.
And that picture is probably from the early 1890s maybe.
And if I remember right, when we were kids, you had Johnson Pontiac, and behind it was kind of a pond.
Kind of a swamp, yeah.
And then it gradually went up the hill back that way.
Yeah.
And that was before you had the 249
Right,
cutoff.
right.
So it would go back all the way to that bowling alley.
Yeah.
Line. You know if this house is still there?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Did not, not sure about that. Okay, so this picture these are all of the Weirich children, the children of Christian and Wilhelmina Weirich that immigrated from Germany. And the names on the back of them, but
To read them for us.
okay, so the one on the end is Emily. She married a Reitz, Reitz. The second one here is Herman Weirich, who is my great-grandfather. Great-grandfather. The little boy that they got a death grip on there, he must not have wanted to cooperate. That is Otto. He was the baby that was born at the time the parents died. The next one here, I'm going to check, is Ida Weirich. She's the one who came from Germany with her parents, and she ended up marrying, that's a couple of different people, but ended up marrying Johann Hirsch, and lived there in Huffsmith. They lived right in that Huffsmith area. And then the last one there is Martha Weirich. She married Michael, so she's one of the Michaels. In the back, Michel.
You know which Michael is it? Is it like Carla Michaels or Melvin Michaels?
Jacob. She married Jacob Michael, and I believe
ancestor of both of them.
No, there were some other Michaels here in the area. Martin Michael, I think Martin MF was Melvin's grandfather. If I'm correct, I could be wrong.
His dad was also MF Michael.
Right, yeah. Correct. But the one in the back is Richard. Mary died when after this picture was taken, probably within another year or two. She was burning leaves or brush or something, and her clothes caught on fire, and she burned to death.
That's amazing. They had photos and the cameras way back then. Isn't it cool?
Yeah. And I can't tell you, that could be one of those. They made them on tin type. It could be, but like I said, this copy was given to us by my Aunt Annie's oldest daughter, Dora Holt. She married Charlie Holt. A lot of people will remember her. She worked at Ward's Pharmacy behind the fountain. That served Cokes and sandwiches, and her and Gussie Rudel.
All right. What other photos do you bring?
Oh, I got this. This is a picture of Ida, the oldest daughter, and her husband Johann Hirsch. Okay, Ida married, her first marriage was to a man named Andreas Schweinle. He was a hunter and hunted game there in the Kirkendall area of Spring Creek. One day they had the one son, William, and he was out hunting, and the gun fell over and went off and shot him.
Which one? The son? Or
No, the dad, Andreas. So she was left with William. It was her and William. Well, she ended up meeting the guy, and where there's a lot of different stories on how that all took place. But she ended up marrying him, and his name was William Macaulay. And they moved off to Pattison, which is in Waller County. And so after she was with him a while, she had gotten an inheritance. Well, he went through her inheritance, and he became real abusive to her. Well, story goes that Herman went over and brought her back to Tomball because, and they had a daughter but she passed away at a young age. So when she came back here, he never followed. So she ended up having to put in the newspaper an article saying, "Hey, where are you at?" And so after so many months, she could file for divorce. She filed for divorce, got a divorce, and then married Johann Hirsch. And they ended up having quite a few kids. He had some from previous marriage, but then they ended up with quite a few of the Hirsches there that live on Zion Road, right there. And their house is still there.
What other photos do you bring?
I have, this is a picture of, now this one is really old, and I'm almost positive this is a tin type picture. This is a picture of my great-great-grandmother, Catherine Bodie, and her mother, Catherine Benner Bodie. Catherine Bodie was born in 1861. So that picture there, if I guess 7, 8 years old, maybe not even that old. This picture's from the late 1870s.
That's really cool.
Early 1870s, yeah. So, and then I have a picture.
So the mother here her maiden name was Benner.
Benner.
She married the Bodies.
Correct.
Which Bodie did she marry?
Johannes.
John Johannes.
John Johannes.
Is that the one they called Doc?
No, that was her brother. The little one's Catherine Bodie's brother. Yeah.
People called him Doc Bodie.
Doc Bodie. Yeah.
You hadn't heard any stories or know whether he was actually a doctor?
I do not know. We never really talked about him much. My grandmother Bodie, Catherine Bodie, didn't speak English, and she spoke German. And my grandmother, when they moved back to Tomball, she moved with them, and she lived in the house with my grandmother and grandfather. He spoke German, although he didn't speak it very much until later years. He was in the hospital, was kind of delirious, and he went, reverted back to speaking German. No one knew what he was saying. My dad understood a little bit and could communicate with her, but she spoke nothing but German. This is a picture of Catherine Bodie in later years. In fact, I still, the table that's right there by her, I still have that table. And then this is a picture of her mother just before she passed away in 1919.
And her name again?
Catherine Benner Bodie.
That's a great old picture.
Yeah.
Do you know when she died, roughly?
1919.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is a picture of my grandfather, Fred Fritz, and his sister Annie. and I don't have. He was born in 1889, so that got to be somewhere around 1890.
That's got interesting markings on the front and back of the photographer that made that for him, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Opposite the courthouse, 103 Congress.
Must have been where the photographer used to be.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I showed you those too.
Yeah.
Let's see what. Okay, so this picture is of the. This is Grandma Catherine Bodie, and these are all her grandkids except Lonnie and Alan. Alan was my Uncle John's youngest son, and this is the rest of her grandkids.
Which Catherine was this?
Catherine Bodie Weirich.
Okay. And tell us who the other people are.
Okay, this is my uncle. This one's my Uncle Collie. The one next to him is Otto Hirsch. And then it's Annie Weirich, who is my Uncle John's daughter. And then it's Dora Holt, who is Dora Hirsch Holt. And then this is Rosie Hirsch Stanley. And the tall one there is Fred Hirsch. And then it's Fritz Weirich, who is was my Uncle John's oldest son. And then one next to him is his brother Albert. And then my dad Henry is on the end.
Wow, he was really young back then.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right, who are the ones in front?
And the ones in front are Benny Weirich and my Aunt Ruby Weirich, Grandma Catherine Bodie. The little boy here is my Uncle Ernest, Ernie. We call him Ernie. And then Lily Weirich is my Uncle John's oldest daughter. So that was all of them. And then it wasn't long after she passed away, my Uncle Lonnie was born, and then Alan was the last for that generation.
What other photos do you have?
All right, let's see. This is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother, and I guess when they got married.
And what were their names again?
Fred C.E. Weirich and Emily Elizabeth Calking Weirich.
Oh, you've got some great photos. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
What's the last one there?
All right, the last one here, this is just a picture. And this was taken, in 63, which would have been about 2.5 years before my grandfather passed away. I mean, before my Uncle John passed away. The one on this side is Uncle John. The one in the middle is Aunt Annie. And my grandfather, Fred C.E. Weirich.
Great old photo. So I wanted to go back to your dad.
Okay.
Everybody most around here called him Henry, right?
Henry, yes, he was.
And he was in the post office?
He was, like I said, he was born in Houston. They moved back out here in 25 and lived here. And then he went off to the war, and when he came back, he lived in Houston.
What did he do in the war?
He was a staff sergeant, and they were in charge of unloading the boxcars and the commissary and the rations for the troops.
Where at?
Well, he was stationed in Alaska. And he always told this story, and I always tell it on Pearl Harbor Day. They had received a shipment of Thanksgiving rations that were a week late, and they were unloading them in a warehouse in Anchorage, Alaska. And the guy that was running the shortwave radio in the office was talking to a guy in Pearl Harbor, and the guy, the radioman told him, they said, "Hey, I got to let you go. We're being bombed." So that's how they knew that, you know, that they were going to go to war. He had joined before the war, and so before the war was over, he transitioned out. He did his 5 years and was out. But yeah, he did. In fact, I should have brought that picture. I have a picture that was posted in National Geographic of him. He helped build the first hand grenade range, and they have a picture of him and another soldier throwing a hand grenade out of this bunker that they built.
So after the war, what did your dad do?
Oh, he was a jack of all trades. He worked in a machine shop in Houston, and he lived over off of Fulton for a while. His first wife was killed in a car wreck, and I think after that, and that was in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s. But he worked for a machine shop. He drove a city bus for a while. He used to tell me about driving out to the baseball stadium where the Houston Buffs played. That all took place out there off of 45 South, just about where Lockwood is. Well, Star Furniture, where Star Furniture had the home plate and a big display that was in the basement there. And that's where that all took place. But yeah, he used to do that and worked at machine shops, and then he moved back to Tomball, and in the early 50s, he met my mom. My mom she was a bookkeeper for Johnson Pontiac, Tessie Winkle Weirich, and she was working there. Well, she went and he bought a car there. She used to always joke. Somehow one of my aunt, my Uncle Collie's wife, Mary, introduced them, and so they started dating, and my mom always said, because my dad had bought a car there at Johnson Pontiac, and she always said, if I'd have known that I was going to have to help pay for that car, I would have sold you a better car. So just one of those things. And they got married here in Tomball, and my grandmother lived right here at 501 Mason, and my mom owned that house at 506 Mason. So when Emily, my oldest sister, was born, they lived there. My brother Mike was like 12. He was like 11 when they got together, but when Emily was born, he was about 12, 13. And they lived there on Mason. When I was born in 1959. My dad went to work for the post office. So Allie Tice, that was the constable there for a number of years. He knew my dad, so when my dad was trying to get hired on at the post office, he put in a good word for him, and so they hired my dad at the post office, and I think it worked out pretty good. He worked like 30-something years there. So, but anyway, the post office was down by Main Street. So the morning I was born at like 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, my dad had to go to work, so he was at work. My brother was 15, 16 years old. He rides his bike down the alley that went between Main Street and the businesses there, and he drives up to the back of the post office and hollers in, "Henry, it's a boy," and turns around and takes off. And my dad had to run out and run down the alley to catch up with him to get some details. So, but yeah, he was a postman here in Tomball from 56 to I think 87. He finally retired.
Well, I remember seeing your dad walking around town. He did a lot of mail delivery walking.
So he started out as the in-town delivery guy. So he had a big leather satchel about this big that he would fill up with mail, throw it over his shoulder, and walk all over Tomball. I mean, that could be why he lived so long, because he was in, his heart was used to pumping. But it was really the perfect job for him because he loved people. He loved talking to people, and he's one of those guys that you could walk into a room and in 15 minutes he already knew everybody's life story, and just it really had a servant's heart. You hear people say that, but he not only did he work for the post office, he volunteered at the fire department. He was in the fire department for a number of years. I think he kind of got into it when he met my mom, because my grandfather, I.W. Winkle, was a chief at one time and the fire marshal for a while, and they were both really active in the fire department. And so over the years he did that, and he was also a scout leader for my brother when he was a teenager. They went through Boy Scouts. Never made Eagle Scout, but when they got past 17 or 18, and now I can't remember, but he formed an explorer troop, which is for young men over the legal age for scouting. The explorer troop became it ended up being a junior fire department, and there was he had like 8 or 10 of the junior firemen that that went through all of that.
I think your dad was our scout leader years of mine back
he was
for a while.
He was. In fact, I think I brought this picture of you and I and your brother Jeff and the Snyder brothers and Randall Lewis, and this is my dad right there. He really enjoyed that kind of stuff. He worked at the church with the youth there and taught Sunday school and
That was First Baptist, right?
First Baptist, yeah.
I remember him. So a lot of these photos I'm showing you are from Leslie Upchurch's Red Book, I call it, Welcome to Tomball, and the others are from the Orange Book, which was like the Chamber of Commerce book.
Yeah, a lot of names there.
This is the other one I found, looked like Mrs. Fred Weirich.
Okay, so that was my grandmother, Emily. She was Catholic. She came from Catholic church. My grandfather was Lutheran, Salem Lutheran, Zion Lutheran. But when they moved out here, there wasn't a Catholic church. So she got together with these other ladies, and the Catholic church had, I think, blown down in a hurricane it was out west of town, from what I remember. Anyway, they moved it over here to Cherry Street, and she was instrumental in helping get that all started. My dad was a altar boy there at the church. He and my Uncle Collie, and I think my Uncle Ernie. I don't think my Uncle Lonnie ever did, but they were altar boys and help the priest with stuff.
How did y'all get to First Baptist?
So my mother, Tessie Winkle, is from East Texas, and my grandmother Mary Winkle, her maiden name was Ayers. They were hard shell Baptists from deep East Texas. So when my dad and my mom got together, she was like, "We're going to the Baptist church," and it worked out because we were. It's funny. I always tell the story. When I was a kid, church would let out. I would be home and change clothes out in the front yard before everybody got out of the church, because it was 100 yards to our house. But yeah, we spent a lot of time at the Baptist church, and it was, it's a good upbringing. Yep.
All right, this one is Durwood Winkle. Who is Durwood?
Durwood, actually, it's funny you bring him up. Today is his birthday, so happy birthday, Uncle Durwood. He's passed away, but I'm sure he's smiling down, laughing.
Turn it around.
Okay, yeah. Durwood was my mom's baby brother, and he graduated from. There was 3 kids. There was Cleo Allen. Everybody called him Rip Winkle, and then there was my mom, Tessie, and then Durwood was the baby.
And that looks like he was in 3rd grade back then.
Yeah.
In 1936.
Yep.
That's a pretty good history.
Yeah, he was a mess. He ended up serving in the Marines in Korea and Vietnam. He did 3 tours in Nam, and was a lifetime soldier. When he retired, he bought the service station on the corner from Jack Beard and ran that for a few years, and then he went to work for the post office.
Was that the corner of Pine?
Corner of Pine and Main on the east corner, northeast corner, yeah. And I worked for him for a summer, but he ran that, and then he went to work for the post office and worked there for a number of years.
Here's another picture of Durwood.
Oh, yeah, at the campfire. Yeah.
Like that, it was out at the Humble Camp.
Humble Camp. Yeah. So my grandfather didn't work for Humble Camp, but he was in Armorada Hess, which was where Target is now. All that was all Armorada Hess. In fact, my brother Mike used to tell me about. They used to go deer hunting over there because my grandfather had access to it. He never worked for Humble Camp, but Uncle Durwood was, friends with all these guys, so he would go over there and hang out with them.
So, what did you do for a living through your career?
Oh, I've done just about everything. I used to work. I started out. I trained a few race horses, but that I figured out real quick that that wasn't a. You were either real good and made a lot of money, or you were real poor, and I didn't like that poor thing. So I ended up in the plumbing business. I worked for a plumbing company out here off of towards Spring, By-Right Plumbing Company. Well, the guy that owned it, he ended up going out of business. So I had some mutual friends from the horse racing business who had a drywall company, or they installed drywall. So they had an opening. They were starting a drywall distributorship. So I went to work for them for a few months, a couple of years, and then after, that kind of, had a little trouble with some of the people that were working there, so I was like, it's time to move on. Drove forklift for an oil field rig up yard for a while. Just kind of bounced around different things. I always had a job. And then I went back to work for that drywall company, and I moved to Dallas, and I built apartments there, and then I moved to Austin, built some apartments there for them, and then they sent me to New Jersey. Maryland first. I spent a year in Maryland, and then after that I came back home because we weren't getting along, and they weren't really paying me the way I thought they should have been paying me. But then another guy called me, and I went to work for him and went back to New Jersey and worked there for over 3 years. Then I went to Florida with that company for a year, and then they started having internal difficulties. So I came back home and wasn't sure what I was going to do. And a good friend of mine that I went to, and went to school with, Joey Edwards, he kept telling me, "Hey, you need to come work for the sheriff's department." And I was like, I don't know. I don't like the thought of somebody shooting at me, you know? And so finally one day I really needed a job really bad. So I went and applied, and I worked for the sheriff's department for 31 years, retired last year, and now I stay home and do honeydews. And I'm next month I'll start taking care of my grandson, who is a 7th generation North Harris County resident. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Tell us about what you remember from growing up here in Tomball.
Well, I remember that things were a lot simpler. I mean, no one ever locked their doors. And you know, like I said, I grew up right here right off of one block off of Main. You know, back then, I'd walk down Main Street. I'd go to every store. You know, I could tell you where every store there was. And I'd walk in and I'd piddle around and I'd look and go to Bradigan's and look at all the clothes and, you know, into all the pharmacies. And it was just a cool time to grow up. I mean, kids these days don't, you know, they just don't get it. They just don't get how, you know, we didn't have phones and we didn't have computers. But you know what? You read a book.
So if you had to pick one, what's the most memorable event growing up in Tomball?
My favorite memories are the football games when the stadium was still over here on Main Street behind the school, which was the high school then.
The high school that burned.
Yeah, and then they rebuilt it. It's now the junior high, but no, intermediate school. But you know, from our house, when I was real little, if we weren't going to go because the weather was not right or whatever, we'd sit on the back porch and listen to the game. We could hear the announcer. We could hear the band playing, and it was really cool because you know, it was really cool memory. Hopefully I'll be able to leave my kids something, and my grandkids, you know, a legacy that they can, you know, at least know where they came from and know how we got here. So anyway, I guess that's it.
Well, thanks for coming today.
All right, appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks.